Hello and welcome to Spring Creek Online. I'm Yadi and I'm with my friend Pastor Patrick. If you recently just found us online, we'd love to connect with you and get to know you better. Help us by texting the word NEW to 96995.
Hey, and we also want to let you know that we're excited that our church, Spring Creek, is gathering in person for 2 services today. So please, wherever you are, be in prayer for those worshiping with us live. But we want you to know that this online service is a living community as well. And part of our online community, as it grows, we want you to find the right relationships that are gospel-centric, that start our journey to a transformed life. And when it comes to connecting with others, connecting is our passion. And 2 ways to deeper connect online is number 1, join us in our digital lobby every single Sunday at 9:45 via a Zoom call, which you can find in the service post. Second, you can text the letters CG, which stand for community groups, to 96995 so that you can find a people just for you. And even if you're watching from out of state or out of the country, know that some of those groups meet online.
We also had our new family service last night for the first time. So thank you parents and kids who had fun with us. And if you don't know, our family service is designed for you and your kids up through 5th grade. It looks a lot like our kids programming with skits and visits from characters and will be led by our Next Gen ministry team. So check that out every Saturday at 5 p.m. Also, next Saturday, show up early because starting at 3:45, we'll have a pumpkin maze set up for you and your family to go through together.
Hey, and also we just want to take a moment and thank all the people at Spring Creek who are incredibly generous. And by contributing to what we are doing here in our community and around the world, we are using what God has given us to share the good news of Jesus by serving others. And if you'd like to give with that mission of generosity, there's some simple ways to give. Number 1, text the word GIVE to 96995, or visit our website, or you can mail in a check to our address. And so thank you guys so much for the spirit of generosity here.
Thanks guys, and see you soon.
Good morning, Spring Creek Church. I'm so glad that you've decided to tune in with us this morning. We have a new song for you. It talks about how Jesus just keeps on getting better and better in our lives, so let's lift him up today.
I will sing of your goodness. I will sing of your love. Though the seasons come quickly, you have always been enough. Though the night may get darker, though the waiting seems long, you have always been faithful to remind me of your love. You are good. In the morning I say you are good. In the evening I say you are good. You are good to me. You have always been patient. You have always been kind. You're consistent through the ages. Oh, what a friend of mine. So I remind my soul to bless you, standing firm upon your truth, knowing you cannot be shaken, 'cause I've seen what you can do. Oh, you are good. In the morning I say you are good. In the evening I say you are good. You are good to me. Oh, you are good. In the morning I say you are good. In the evening I say you are good. You are good to me. You keep on getting better. 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 You keep on getting better.
Psalm 73 gives us a genuine picture of what it's like to have a deep desire for God above all else. It says, "When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you take me into glory. Who have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." In this next song this morning, let's just take everything that we desire and lay it at the feet of Jesus and just ask him to be our greatest desire in our hearts and in our lives.
No other so sure and steady. My hope is held in your hand. When castles crumble and breath is fleeting, upon this rock I will stand. Upon this rock I will stand. Glory, glory, we have no other King but Jesus, Lord of all. We raise the anthem, our loudest praises ring. We crown him Lord of all, Lord of all. Your kindly rule has shattered and broken the curse of sin's tyranny. My life is hidden 'neath heaven's shadow. Your crimson flood covers me. Your crimson flood covers me. Glory, glory, we have no other King but Jesus, Lord of all. We raise the anthem, our loudest praises ring. We crown him Lord of all, Lord of all. In all my sorrows, Jesus is better. Make my heart believe. In every victory, Jesus is better. Make my heart believe. Than any comfort, Jesus is better. Make my heart believe. More than all riches, Jesus is better. Make my heart believe. Our soul eternal, Jesus is better. Make my heart believe. Our souls declaring Jesus is better. Make my heart believe. Glory, glory, we have no
What is something you've learned about conflict in our relationship?
You know, you tend to be like, prove it, I didn't do that. And I tend to be like, you suck. And no. And I'm going to go pout for a day now. And then we kind of figured out that that wasn't going to work long term. And we did at some point get some counseling. Not for that, but for just communication help.
It's good.
And that has helped us learn to present things better.
I think that, you and I both are a little stubborn in our approach to things. I'm probably more stubborn than you are. Yeah. But I think we both realize that we're aware of it. And that's the biggest help that we've had, is that we identify where we're challenged or have difficulty or conflict in our relationship, and we talk about it.
Like we know the triggers.
We know the trigger. We know each other's triggers enough, and we also have enough thought to consider each other and to think
most of the time.
Right, and so it doesn't continue.
Yeah, I think I see that, and I think as time goes on, because we can see the triggers and because we know this is not going to go well, or I didn't like that we miss them. We avoid them more often.
Yes.
Because we're better at heading things off at the pass.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you could join us today for what's sure to be a really special service. Just a couple of quick announcements before we get started. Now, many of you are aware that we have started our campus back up here in Garland at 2660 Beltline Road. You are certainly welcome to join us anytime at 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Now, please understand, if you are not comfortable returning to the church building at this point, no one's trying to rush you on that. Especially if you're older, maybe have compromised immunity, or somebody in your family that you're concerned about, please know we're going to keep doing this online service the way we're doing it as best we possibly can to continue to connect with you, because you matter so much to us. The other thing I just want to encourage you to do is, we're just in a challenging time of the year with all the shutdowns and everything that has happened. There have been some of our folks who've lost jobs, and other people who've been big time contributors to Spring Creek who've had to cut way back in terms of their own giving because of the challenges they're facing in their businesses. And so I just want to encourage you, if this shutdown has not affected you in that way, please make it a regular part of your lifestyle to honor God in your giving. It's really easy to do that. You can go online to the church's website. You can sign up to have your regular ongoing gift deducted from your paycheck every time you're paid, or you can do what I do, and that's just text to give. It's really simple. You only have one time you set it up, and after that, it's just super easy to give either with your debit or your credit card. But it's an opportunity not only to provide for the pastors and the ongoing ministry, as well as the relief that we're doing in our local community and our ministry partners around the world who continue to rely on us during this time for the support they're needing. So thank you for the way you support the church. Just please be conscious of that. Continue to make it a priority in your life. Well, we're in this brand new series that we're calling The Struggle is Real. And we're looking at our closest and most intimate relationships. Today, my message is entitled, A Great Marriage is Worth Fighting For. If you would, just bow your heads with me. Let's begin with a time of prayer. Father, I thank you for this time we have together, and I know that you're already at work, that you've been working and moving in our lives through this time of worship, and now you're going to continue in this spirit of worship as we gather around your word, and you are ministering in all of our lives to speak to us about maybe personal challenges we're facing, issues that need to be brought to the surface, and a way forward in situations where we've lost hope. So Lord, I know that you're going to be at work. I pray, God, that you would just continue that work among us today. And when it's all said and done, we will know we met with you. In Jesus' name, amen. You know, in 1 Corinthians 7:28, Paul writes, those who marry will face many troubles in life. In that verse, Paul's reminding us that if you're married, you should expect a certain level of problems, that challenges are really par for the course. We shouldn't be surprised by them. You're going to face conflict. You're going to have fights, which always surprises me when someone says to me, you know, my wife and I, we never fight. And my first thought is, and you think that's a good thing? Because normal people, yes, even two people who love each other incredibly, are going to disagree. They're going to have bad days. Sometimes they're going to say things that they're going to regret, and they're even going to hurt one another's feelings. If you tell me you never fight, my first thought is, then one of you swallowing yourself to be in this relationship. That's why one of the best indicators of whether or not a couple is going to stay together is not whether or not they fight, but how they handle it when they do. Years ago, I came across this quote in Health magazine written by a woman named Diane Solly. She was the founder and director of Smart Marriage. And what she was talking about is current, what she called groundbreaking research around conflict in marriage. This is what she wrote. These experiments demonstrated something astonishing. Couples who stayed together fought as frequently and over precisely the same things as couples who split up. Experiment after experiment showed this until we couldn't avoid it. We all have irreconcilable differences. Every couple has them. Those who have successful marriages simply have learned ways of talking about their problems. That's a really powerful statement. What she's saying is, we all have problems. If you're married, you're going to have problems. The difference is some people have learned to work through them and others have not. So let me just say right up front, there are always two warning signs in every marriage. Number one is the absence of conflict, and number two is the avoidance of conflict. When there's no conflict at all, that means one of you's already dead. The best thing you can do is go ahead and call the undertaker. It reminds me of one time Ruth Graham, who was the wife of the famous evangelist Billy Graham, was asked if she and Billy agreed on everything. And she said, "My goodness, no. If we did, there'd be no need for one of us." And get this, one of the country's leading small group gurus made this statement that one thing that all poor small groups, all bad small groups have in common is an absence of conflict. If it's a bad group, there's no conflict. Why? Because if you're really talking about things that matter, if you're getting beneath the surface with people, if you're talking to one another in real and substantive ways, then that's going to cause problems. It's going to result in conflict. Conflict is the price you pay for intimacy. There's simply no other way of achieving it. Same thing's true of marriage. So the absence of conflict has never been a healthy relational sign. You know, my grandma used to tell me all the time, well, me and your grandpa, we never had a cross word. And my thought was, that's messed up. But the other warning sign is conflict avoidance. Because we know conflict is the price you pay for intimacy, smart couples are willing to pay that price for a deepening sense of closeness and connection. When conflict or without conflict, it's very difficult to peel away the superficial levels of our life and discover who we really actually are. It was a marriage therapist who said real harmony never comes earlier than 10 or 15 years into the relationship. I think that's absolutely true. Because up until that time, you're still not really deep with one another. You've never really gone that far beneath the surface to touch those things that really can come in conflict with one another. So over the years, you've heard me many times refer to the research of Dr. John Gottman and the Gottman Institute. He's one of the leading and most respected marriage researchers in America today. He's quoted by Christian and secular resources alike. Dr. Gottman has been studying marriages for more than 3 decades now, hundreds of marriages, and he can now predict with a 95% accuracy what marriages will flourish and which ones will fail. Now, it shouldn't surprise any of us that his research is actually based around how couples process and deal with conflict. In particular, he's discovered the major warning signs of relational demise. He calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Now, this is ground we've been over before, and we've gone over it recently, so I really am not going to spend a lot of time on it in this message. If you want to, you can refer to some previous messages to get more detail, but I just want to highlight them to refresh your memory. According to Gottman's research, unhappy couples, marriages that eventually deteriorate, tend to all follow the same specific downward spiral. The first horseman that sign that a marriage is in trouble is criticism. So in Gottman's view, criticism is very different from complaining. He describes it like this: we complain about actions, we criticize people. In other words, criticism is focused on the person, not the behavior. It's the difference between saying, I asked you to take out the trash and you didn't, versus you're so lazy you don't take out the trash. One of the best ways to differentiate criticism from complaining is this: complaints begin with the word I, criticism begins with the word you. So when I'm complaining, I'm talking about things that I'm noticing, I'm seeing. When I am criticizing, I am making it personal about you. Now, please hear me. Complaints can and should be talked out in marriage. Complaints are statements about a person's behavior minus the feeling of blame. But criticism turns a complaint into an accusation. If criticism is left unchecked in a relationship, if it becomes normative, then it always heralds the arrival of the second horseman, which is contempt. Basically, what separates criticism from contempt is insulting or maybe even psychologically or emotionally injuring our partner. Think of contempt as criticism on steroids. When criticism becomes contempt, you add things like name-calling, hostile humor, sarcasm, which a lot of people make such a small deal of sarcasm. Sarcasm, the word literally means to rip the flesh, because it's a kind of biting sense of humor that is intended to wound as we joke, even mocking our partner. It's sad that sometimes the ones we love are the worst ones, are the ones we treat the worst in relationship. Contempt is the way I devalue my partner. Gottman said that contempt can even be expressed through a look. In fact, he studied marriages in such detail that he's actually cataloged the behaviors, the external behaviors that people manifest when they're arguing, and even down to the effects of small things like facial gestures. Fairly early on, he discovered when a spouse, particularly the wife, rolls her eyes while the other one is talking, he said the marital exit sign is blinking fiercely. So if contempt is left unabated, it heralds the arrival of the third horseman, which is defensiveness. The defensiveness is, of course, a natural reaction to feeling attacked. But when one or both of you becomes defensive, no real progress is made on any marriage problems, because each one believes that the problems are primarily the other person's fault. When you find yourself making excuses for your reactions, or you counter every accusation your spouse makes with one of your own, the marriage is in trouble. Because each person is playing the victim, no one's really dealing with the issues. So you kind of devolve into this Cold War, sometimes even a hot war. But typically, this is where someone in the marriage will declare, I'm not changing until they do, which leads to the stage for the final horseman to arrive, which is stonewalling. Now, according to Dr. Gottman, stonewalling is the worst thing that can happen in a marriage, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's clamming up. It's acting like a stone wall. We give no response. We withdraw emotionally or physically. We refuse to communicate. Sometimes we call this the silent treatment. Once stonewalling becomes habitual, the marriage is in serious trouble, because communication has gone from poor to non-existent. Now, a lot of people try to justify being silent and disengaging by saying, I don't want to make problems worse. But you see, the truth is, non-talking is not the absence, if you will, of communication. It's actually a powerful negative form of communication. It communicates disdain. It's actually a form of punishment. Now, maybe you recognize yourself in one or all of those behaviors I've just mentioned. Maybe your marriage or a really important relationship to you right now is in trouble, and you can see why. I know that feeling all too well. I know what it's like to usher in a marriage apocalypse, because this is exactly what Brenda and I did in the first 10 years of our marriage. In fact, 27 years ago, Brenda wrote this about me. I want to read it to you. This is from her journal. She's let me share it. I thought I'd found the perfect man. He was everything I wanted, a good man who was both godly and trustworthy. We were married, but after a few short years, I began to see a side of my husband I'd never seen before. He developed an explosive temper. He became selfish with his time. He used serving God as an excuse to ignore me. He became hateful and sarcastic, belittling me in front of our friends and putting me down. I felt like he was ashamed of me and often treated me like a child. He would end my sentences for me and modify my advice whenever we'd be talking to our friends. Over the next several years, my husband became a full-fledged workaholic. The more I begged him to change, the more he isolated himself from me. The times I needed him most, that was when he was least available. Our fights increased, and I became angry and bitter against my husband and God. To avoid fights, I had to walk on eggshells all the time. All my dreams of a happily ever after came crashing down. The man who I'd counted on to give me safety and stability, I felt had betrayed me. I felt like I'd done everything I could to save our marriage. I bit my tongue. I hid my anger. I felt I was understanding and forgiving. Finally, the pain became intolerable. Something had to be done. I began to wonder if it was better for our children to see us fight all the time and hate each other, or if it'd be better just to divorce. Now, Brenda and I were in deep weeds. I mean, seriously, nearly wrecked our marriage by the way we dealt and refused to deal with conflict in our marriage. But even people who are neck deep in these problems, there is hope. In fact, I've always loved this. This is one of the things that Gottman has observed, again, over the years with couples. The good news is this. Even if a couple has gone through all 4 of these stages, it doesn't mean their marriage is doomed. Spouses who recognize what is happening can develop communication techniques to overcome the difficulty. Did you hear that? All it takes to pull your marriage, this really important relationship, this most intimate and caring relationship, all it takes to pull it out of this downward spiral is to admit that there's a problem, then develop the skills that are necessary to overcome it. Now, before we move on in the message, I want to share with you God's wisdom about what ultimately drives all of this sort of behavior. I call this the heart of conflict. Listen to the Apostle James describe it. He said, "Where do you think all these quarrels come from? Do you think they just happen? Think again. They come about because you want your own way and fight for it deep inside yourself." This passage describes the root cause of all destructive conflict. Conflicts arise from unmet desires in the heart. So I want to walk you through this same process according to God's wisdom. And what you're going to be amazed to see is this perfectly parallels what Gottman has described in the 4 horsemen. The first thing is I desire. Conflict always begins with some sort of desire, something I want or something that's getting in the way of what I want, and I get angry about that. That leads to I demand. So I desire, then I demand. Unmet desires have this way of working deeper and deeper into our souls. This is especially true when we see our desire as something we need, as something we deserve, as something I have to have in order to be happy. So I start feeling entitled to the things I desire, and then it shifts from I wish I could have this to I have to have this. I demand it. Of course, this is where the trouble sets in, because even if the initial desire wasn't necessarily wrong, it's now become so strong that it begins to control all of my thoughts and behavior. In biblical terms, my desires become an idol to me. So I desire becomes I demand, which leads to this, I judge. You want to know the surest tip-off that you're judging? I mean, you hear people quote all the time, Matthew 7:1, do not judge lest you be judged. And we talk about don't judge. But a lot of us don't think about what judgment really means. Here, let me describe it. When you're judging, you're pretending to know what you can't possibly know. You're claiming to know your spouse's motives. Now, let me tell you something. Motives are the most hidden thing about us, why we do what we do. People can see what we do. They can't know why we do it. People can hear what we say. They can't know why we say it. This is why Satan loves to attack motives, because it's the most difficult accusation to defend yourself against. So when the Bible talks about not judging others, it's mainly referring to this aspect of judgment, to judge the motives of the heart. Judgmental people all hold this same trait in common. They judge the very thing that's impossible to know about another human being. They presume to know why people do what they do. Friends, you can know the what, but you can't know the why. Only God can judge the hidden secrets of the heart. That's why we have to leave that judgment to him alone. Besides, you don't even know fully your own heart or your own motives. We are this very complex mixture of motives. Some of those motives are very unconscious motives. We're not in touch with them. We're not aware of them. And when we're not aware of them, the things that are really driving behaviors, the things that are driving what we say, we're not even aware of them. How could you possibly be aware of what's going on in me? Do you know that the Bible teaches that there are two activities that take place before the throne of God every single moment of every single day? And it's intercession and accusation. This is the very nature of the conflict between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of darkness. The Bible tells us that Jesus always lives to make intercession. In other words, it's Christ's nature to be an intercessor, to carry our needs to the Father, to pray for us in our weakness, to see the brokenness of our lives and carry that to God on our behalf. But look at how Satan is different from Jesus. Satan is the accuser of our brethren who accuses them before our God day and night. So what does Satan accuse? He accuses our motives. I mean, all you have to do, read the Old Testament book of Job. This is the clearest and most explicit glimpse we get into Satan's activity before the throne of God. And he stands before God and he accuses God's servant Job. And in particular, he says, I know why. I know why Job does what he does. He serves you because you protect him. He serves you because you're good to him. If you wouldn't do those things, he wouldn't serve you. So Satan accuses, Jesus intercedes. My question for you is this: who are you more like, Jesus or Satan? Jesus knows the brokenness of our lives. He carries it to the Father on our behalf. He prays. He's a go-between. Satan, on the other hand, stands before the Father, criticizing and accusing our motives. The very nature of Satan's work is to attack people's motives. And just so you know, Satan doesn't know our motives. He's not God. He can't see into the human heart. The Bible says that's a characteristic of omniscience. That's something that only God possesses. Only God knows everything. Satan only guesses. He doesn't know our motives, how we think. That's the exclusive domain of God. So next time you're tempted to tell your mate you know why they're doing what they're doing, stop. Before you make an accusation, stop and ask yourself, am I going to be like Jesus or the devil? And that leads to this final thing. I desire becomes I demand. I demand becomes I judge. I judge becomes I punish. When people fail to satisfy our desires and our demands, our expectations, our idols demand that they should suffer. So we hurt the ones we love. We punish them for failing to fulfill our desires. And we can do this in a lot of ways. Some of us do it by verbally abusing our spouse. Some of us doing by withdrawing, either physically or emotionally. We give them the silent treatment. We treat them like a non-person. We want to make sure the message gets through loud and clear. You have hurt me, and now I'm going to hurt you back. We can do all kinds of things. We can be passive-aggressive, all types of things. What I'm saying is, before Gottman ever figured it out, these four horsemen, God told us in his word, this is the plight of human beings, and this is why we react when our desires are unmet. So let me offer you some practical suggestions for dealing with conflict. And the first thing is simply this: to differentiate between relationships with problems and problem relationships. All relationships have problems and conflicts, period, full stop. But healthy ones value conflict and handle conflict in a constructive way. Relationships that don't face and deal with their conflicts are problem relationships. Now, for Brenda and I, when we were first married, we were scared to death of getting a divorce, largely because we'd both come from broken homes. We had seen one of our parents cheat, actually have an affair on our birth parent, and as a result, their marriage went to hell in a handbasket. we drug then this very unrealistic expectation into our marriage that we needed to be free of conflict. As a result, every time I got angry with Brenda, every time I got crosswise, every time something I didn't understand but really hurt me, I swallowed it. I pushed it down. I repressed it. I did everything I could to keep it from becoming conscious. And what I did is I was so afraid that with every argument, we were just moving one step closer to divorce. But as a result of that, as a result of not dealing with those problems and dealing with that hurt and dealing with my frustration, I became this simmering volcano that literally even the smallest things could set me off. I thought if I repressed it, I would protect my marriage. And that's a myth, because all buried conflict has a high rate of resurrection. If something's bothering you, it's better to get it out in the open and on the table and deal with it right away. The bottom line is this: far more important than the fact that you argue is how you argue. Poorly handled conflict always harms relationship. Another thing you need to learn to do is this: to examine your assumptions. One of the things that stays most hidden in conflict in our marriage are our assumptions. Unspoken assumptions are the saboteurs of communication. So let me explain how this works in something I'm calling the ladder of inference. Now, this is not an original term with me. If you're familiar with the work by Peter Senge, The Fifth Discipline, you probably recognize the illustration I'm about to put up on the screens. It's called the ladder of inference. Now, we're going to leave this graphic up for a while as I walk you through and explain, because there's a lot to it. At the bottom of the ladder, you can see I observe your behavior. That's all the available data that I have. I can take in whatever it is you're doing or whatever it is you're saying. That's what's known on the ladder of inference. So in the middle runs, I begin to make assumptions about the meaning of what I'm seeing, which means some things register with me more than maybe other things. I choose to focus on certain behaviors and ignore other things. I select the data I'm going to focus on. At this point, I begin then to interpret that data. I'm trying to figure out why you did what you did. In other words, I'm now assigning meaning to your behavior. This is the judging I was talking about a moment ago. Then I draw my conclusions. I see what you did. Now, in my mind, I figured out why you did that. Finally, I decide what I'm going to do. I choose a course of action based on what I think you did and why you did it, and I lash out at you, I get mad at you, I ignore you. Really, I could do just about anything. Now, here's the deal. Practically every one of us climbs the ladder of inference instinctively. We do this without a thought. We're already at the top of the ladder before we know it. So let's keep this slide up here a little bit, and let's talk about how this works out in practical terms, an illustration, if you will, of what this might look like in marriage. So let's say you come home from work, and your husband has picked up your son from daycare, so they're already home. He hasn't made supper, even though there's a frozen pizza in the freezer. Your son is crying because his diaper needs to be changed. And the moment you walk in, your husband complains that he's hungry and he still has business calls to finish. That's the bottom rung of the ladder. That's the available data. That's what you know. That's what you can see. That's everything about this situation that you have. Now the wife starts climbing. She selects some details and begins to assign meaning to those details. Now in her mind, she thinks, well, that pizza must not have been good enough for him. He didn't even bother to check the baby's diaper, and he thought his business calls were more important than her. From there, she ratchets up her assumptions about her husband's state of mind, that evidently he must be mad at her, fed up with her and the kid, and would rather be any place than where he is right now. Once she reaches the top of the ladder, she's concluded that her husband in general must think that she's a clinging, incompetent wife and mother who doesn't know what she's doing, which she knows she's not, and she's really angry about that, so she announces, "We've got a problem," to which he says, "What are you talking about?" Now understand, I'm not saying that the husband didn't actually think all of those things, but what I am saying is the wife doesn't know any of that for sure. But on the analysis of what she sees, she's made these assumptions, either by revelation, osmosis, something that she can now know what's going on inside her husband without asking him a single question. That's called climbing the ladder of inference. Now, please understand, this scenario could be easily reversed. It could be the wife and the husband trading places because all of us do it all the time. We climb the ladder of inference. But what this illustration does is highlight the basic assumption on the ladder of inference, and that is, based on your behavior, somehow in some way, I can see through to see what's motivating you, see what's really going on in your heart, to know why you're doing what you're doing. It's about judgments. It's about being judgmental about why I think I know what's going on inside you. That's the conviction that moves us up the ladder. Climbing the ladder is easy. It's habituated. It's something we rarely think about. We just do it. But it's also the major way we sabotage communication in marriage. Is there a better way to deal with that behavior that's confusing us? Well, yes, there is. And you've got to learn to clarify instead of climb. You know, the truth is this: none of us has a right to make assumptions, to just climb the ladder. But every one of us has a right to question. That's what gets feelings out in the open. That's what gives clarity to what's actually going on. And that's what gives opportunity to our partner to explain what's going on inside them. Because think about it. Most of the time that we spend on the ladder of inference is spent in the dark. We really don't know anything except what we've observed at the bottom of the ladder. Everything else is hidden and unseen, which leads me to this. Clarifying is hard work. It means asking questions. Sometimes questions that might make your spouse angry, but we have to, because we have to know what we're talking about rather than assume to know what we can't possibly know. Clarify also means that we sometimes admit to ourselves that we're already 3 steps up the ladder and we need to back down to what I actually can see and know. Now, let me give you a practical and non-threatening way to clarify. It's a simple statement, one you might want to write down, and it's this: please help me understand. Can you please help me understand why you didn't change the baby's diaper? Can you please help me understand why you didn't fix supper? Can you please help me understand why you need to make these phone calls right now? Clarifying keeps us focused on the facts and not our interpretation of the facts. It's also great because it's direct. I mean, you're talking to the only person who can actually clarify what's happening. Now, either that person's going to answer the question directly or they're going to hem and haw. Either way, you got your answer, right? I mean, if they answer the question directly, you'll know better what's going on inside them. If they hem and haw, that means I need to ask a bunch more questions because I need to know what's actually happening. But it's always a relational dead end to assume that I know the motives behind another person's behavior and then pass judgment based on that knowledge. Relational health is about clarifying, not climbing. So are you climbing the ladder with anyone right now? Or do you find yourself just instinctively doing this as your go-to? You see some behavior and immediately you know in your mind, or you think you know, why they're doing what they're doing. Is it become a way of life for you? One researcher explained that most couples will typically wait 6 years from the time the storm clouds surface in their marriage before they seek any kind of professional advice. And by then, it's often too late. Statistically, by then, only 20% of them can be helped in any kind of way. Even more likely, they don't seek help at all. Studies have found that on average, people filing for divorce, 25% of them have never sought any counseling or any help whatsoever before they filed. So there's a better way to handle problems, and it has everything to do with suspending judgment and learning to ask appropriate questions. To quit pretending to know what you can't possibly know about your spouse, to focus on the facts and what's happening instead of your interpretation of the fact. So we have to stop doing the things that are actually causing the real problems, but we also need to start doing things that'll make the marriage better. And that's what this last point is about, the magic ratio. Now, this was a startling statistic to me, but I think it's absolutely true. In the Gottman Institute, they said 69% of marriage conflicts are never solved. In other words, most marriage problems are going to be managed through dialogue rather than definitively solved. And that's comforting to me. It's actually encouraging to me. Because we have a lot of disagreements as couples, and a lot of those disagreements simply arise out of personality difference. Someone's basic personality is not going to change. So in that sense, the conflict is not solvable. But that doesn't mean we have to remain gridlocked. Haven't you found, Brenda and I have been married now for 37 years. There are certain fights, conflicts, disagreements that we seem to have again and again. I'll give you some silly examples. Brenda and I, practically every night, we argue about movies. We have totally different tastes in movies. I typically will go for an action movie, and she goes for something other than that. And so what happens at night, around 7 o'clock, we'll say, okay, what do you want to watch? Now, what we've learned to solve this is we've got to take turns. So it's her turn, it's my turn. Well, when it's my turn, I'll say, hey, I want to watch Lord of the Rings. She says, I hate it. I want to watch Men in Black. I hate it. And we go back and forth. And I say, well, you don't have to like my movie. It's my turn. We get to watch it. And then when her turn comes up, we go through Netflix. And for 30 minutes, we read the caption of every new show that's on Netflix. And then she chooses something that I'm not sure Netflix even is aware that's in their catalog. Now, here's the deal. She's not going to watch the movie. My wife, about 15 minutes into the movie, is going to fall asleep. And she will wake up in about 10 minutes of the movie are left. So she is an expert on hundreds of movies, how they begin and how they end, but she has no idea what the plot line is like in between. That's just the way it is. So when she chooses a movie, she's choosing a movie for me to watch. This is an ongoing argument. We have a lot of fun with it. She knows that about herself. I know this about myself. We fight about it all the time. Another thing, she's a clean freak and I'm a neatnik. Now you'd think that would be a match made in heaven. It is not. Because she likes things to be exceptionally clean. I like things to be really, really neat. I like everything in its place. I always know where my phone is. I always know where this is and that is. And she will just lay things haphazardly everywhere. And it's constantly, hey, call my phone so I can find it, right? Or how about this? Brenda is a hoarder, and I'm a person who probably throws away too many essential things. But as a result, we've had a lot of fights over the years about how much of this stuff we need, how much of it we need to get away with. I tell her all the time, if you emptied my nightstand and my closet, there's no evidence I live in this house whatsoever. But these are things that we just understand. We're different from one another. And we live with one another in an understanding way. And we've learned not to make a mountain out of these issues because they're just not that important. So what is the magic ratio? Well, the Gottman Institute has found this. If your marriage is going to succeed, you need a minimum of a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interaction. Not 50-50, but one positive encounter for every negative thing that happens, 5 loving actions to balance off every one negative interaction. You need 5 times more positive things passing between you and your spouse than negative. Think of it like this. At your soul, at the center of your soul, it's kind of an emotional love bank. And what we do in marriage is we want to make sure we're making plenty of deposits into that love bank. Don't treat this like you do your checking account where there's just always barely enough in there. You want to make sure that there's more than enough in there. There's an emergency fund. There's plenty of funds. You keep making deposits into your love bank, and you definitely want to make far more deposits than you're making withdrawals. Withdrawals will happen. They will. You'll hurt one another, even not intentionally. You're going to hurt one another. You'll say things, you'll do things that are going to cause harm, and it's going to cause a withdrawal. You want to make sure there's far more good stuff in there than bad. Albert Einstein's best known for the theory of relativity, but he actually deserves recognition for another tremendous feat. He and his wife, Elsa, were happily married for over 60 years. He credited his secret to marriage to a principle that he discovered in science that he said served him well in marriage too. And that principle was this: for every one incorrect input, it required 11 correct inputs to make things right again. So he discovered years ago what Gottman's saying too. You've got to have far more good stuff passing between you than bad. If you want a marriage that'll go the distance, then there better be a whole lot more deposits than withdrawals in the love bank. It's interesting, Tony Campolo, he's a really well-known sociologist, but he has a degree in counseling too. He used to have couples come to him and seek him who had lost and zeroed out on all affections as a married couple. And Tony writes this, he said, sometimes in counseling situations, I encountered persons who claim an absence of any kind of affectionate feelings for their mate. These people say that whatever they once felt has died and that they're left with no other alternative but to end their marriage. Now, with people like that, Tony would always tell them if they would do what he told them to do within a month, the feelings of affection would return. Guess what he told him to do? 2 things. Number 1, he'd say, every day, make a new list of 10 things you would do for your spouse if you were in love. Then number 2, every day, do the 10 things on the list. It's as simple as that. No secret formula, no magic recipe. When you're doing loving things, you will have loving feelings. Because love is first and foremost an action. It's energy. It's something you put into motion. It's something you do. It's something I taught you a few weeks back. I said it's always easier to act your way into a feeling than to feel your way into an action. In other words, if you're just waiting for the feelings to come to renew the relationship you have with your loved one, those feelings may not return doing nothing. But if you begin to act in loving ways toward them, you might find that those feelings will truly resurrect. C.S. Lewis wrote this in his classic, Mere Christianity. He said, do not waste your time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you're behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love them. What I'm saying is this, pure and simple. My marriage works when I'm most concerned with the kind of spouse my spouse is getting. I don't have a marriage goal for Brenda. Oh, sure, I could, but how could I enforce that goal? How could I make that happen? It's not possible. You say, well, then how do you know if your partner's going to try? You don't. You don't know, but you can't make them do that either. You could have a goal to make them try, but what's that going to do but create frustration and alienation and a whole lot more judgment in your own life? I can control the kind of partner my spouse is getting. So let me just say this as we wrap up. Brenda and I went through incredibly dark days. At one point, I remember telling someone, 27 years ago, I said, I don't know if I'm seeing a light up ahead or if I'm just getting accustomed to the darkness. I don't know. At that time, I didn't know whether or not we would make it. But I have been to hell and back. Brenda would say the same thing. In fact, years ago, so this was back in 1993, in front of Springcreek Church, after Brenda and I had gone through so much misery and so toxic in our marriage and had taken out our anger and our disappointment on one another for years, we'd gone to therapy, we'd gone through that, and we knew we were going to make it. We decided to do a message together that we called To Hell and Back. And we told our story. We told it honestly. We told it fully. We held nothing back. One thing I learned a long time ago, there's nothing to fear in a forgiven and healed past. I'm going to be an open book about this kind of stuff because I know what God did in that time. So we told our story, and we told it honestly, and we told it as fully as we possibly could. And at the close of that message, we renewed our vows to one another in front of this congregation. It was for years one of the best-selling messages in the history of Springcreek Church. But here's what I know. You may go to hell. You may go to hell in your marriage. We went to hell, but you don't have to stay there. You really don't. There is a way out, and it begins with beginning to examine these problem types of behaviors in the way we communicate. It's beginning to understand how desires lead to demands, how demands lead to judgment, how judgment leads to punishment, and that I can interrupt that cycle by stopping this vicious behavior of believing I know why you do what you do. Instead, I just go on basis of what is actually happening. I ask the questions that I need clarification about. We get to real understanding. And if you disclose to me and you share with me what's really going on, maybe we can find common ground. And then more than anything, we make far more deposits of love and admiration and respect and gratitude and the people we care about. And you're going to find those feelings of love not only return, but they amplify and they grow and they flourish in this soil of appreciation. Let's pray. Father, I just want to pray right now for any and everybody who's listening to me in this moment, who has been here, who's struggled in relationship or is struggling right now. There is hope, Lord. There is hope. There's no question that if we learn new behaviors, new ways of communicating, of addressing those problematic behaviors in our relationship, that things really can improve. That we may feel like we're in hell in our relationship, but we really don't have to stay there. we can move out of that place by listening to your wisdom and doing things your way. Lord, if there's anything at all, I hope that gets addressed through this message is this presumption that I can know someone else's motives. That, Lord, this is something you clearly indict in your word, and you clearly show us. This is what the enemy does. This is what evil looks like. Evil presumes to know what it cannot possibly know. God, help us to abandon that practice so that we can focus on what we actually know instead of that. I also pray, God, that there would be people who would make a decision today that they would begin to list behaviors of things they would do if they were loving their spouse in a real and honest and authentic way, and then begin to enact that list every single day, that they would act in loving ways toward their spouse, even when they're not feeling loving, even when they feel like the feeling is as far from their heart as possible, that God, they would do their part in providing the kind of partner that their spouse needs, that we would be busy about making deposits of love into that bank account so that, Lord, when there is an occasional withdrawal, we never get back a draft that says insufficient funds. So, Lord, I pray for your healing hand upon so many lives. And I pray for anybody who's here who doesn't understand, who doesn't know that, God, this is the way you love us. You give of yourself so completely, so fully to us, even knowing our hearts and knowing our brokenness. And you sent your son, Jesus Christ, to die for us. And because of that, Lord, you have created the possibility of a relationship that helps to heal every other relationship because of the deep love we experience in your family. So I pray if there's someone here that doesn't know you, that they would even ask in this moment to say, Jesus, I want you in my life. I don't understand it all, but I believe you died for me. I believe you rose again. I want Christ as my forgiver and my leader. I want to follow him. I want to grow in him. I want to love him for the rest of my life. Help me in Jesus' name. Amen. So, really glad that you chose to carve out this time today to be with us. Please hang around. We always have a time of discussion with the other pastors as they talk about the message and how it might apply. We use this as a part of our small group curriculum. So if you're not in a small group right now, please understand, you already have the message prep or the small group prep because you listened to the message. That's all it takes to be qualified to be a part of a small group. You hear the message, you come together and discuss. So if you haven't signed up for a small group, take a moment, text groups to our text line, and they'll be happy to get you information about how to connect with a small group. God bless you, and have a great week.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're about to discuss the sermon, but we want to let you know that we would love to see your comments in the feed below as we discuss. Also want to let you know that if you're looking for a community, a place for your life to transform, all you need to do for your next step is simply text the letters CG, which stand for Community Group, to 96995. Josh, you want to take it from here?
Thank you, Patrick. I'm excited to have you guys here for this discussion, which is fun and probably not easy as we dive into conflict in marriage and relationships in general. So I brought our two most conflicting staff for today's discussion. But you are both married and you have both dealt with conflict in your marriage, I imagine, as have I. I'm also married. But I'd love to know, what does conflict typically look like in your marriage?
It's always fighting and arguing, hair pulling. No, actually, it changes, right? So more years we spend together, it just evolves. It's weird to say, like, still in the honeymoon, you're like, okay, I forgive you. And then after the baby's like, no. And then now we're like, just chill about it. But no, it just changes. Right now, it's... I know, like, one thing I've always said, or recently that I applied, was to never assume. So I go forward and I just ask, hey, babes, like, that was nice, I'm hurt by this, or anything like that. So I want to avoid conflict, not like avoid it, but just more like, let's face it, because I know after 17?
A number of years.
18, many years.
Yes.
You kind of just learn. You learn to really work with each other, or you have to like learn, okay, what works and what doesn't. So it's a different level, I guess, of conflict at home. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you hit it right in the head that conflict changes. I love to ask people in their first dating, are you an exploder or are you an imploder? Because usually conflict looks like one of the two. Either one, you explode and you're very, very demonstrative when you're in conflict, or two, you just implode and your emotions just feel like they're crushing you and you in turn can crush the other person. Hope is the imploder and I'm the exploder. So usually conflict for me looks like I try to keep things very calm until all of a sudden it rapidly devolves. But what we've learned is how, and I love what Pastor Keith talked about, that it's not that you avoid conflict, but you have how to have healthy conflict. So with Hope and I, there's several things that we try to do so that conflict looks healthy. And I think one of the key elements actually comes from the Bible, is not letting the sun go down on your anger, that you feel that there's resolution before you go to sleep that night.
That's solid and difficult, I think. For Melissa and I, we would always joke, probably the first 2 years of our marriage, like, oh no, are we going to have our first fight? But we had already had several arguments and conflict just because we're very different people. And that's the cool thing about our marriage, is that she is different than I am. And that's why it works. And that's why he quoted Billy Graham's wife. And they said, do you guys ever have any conflict? Do you guys always agree? And she said, no, we disagree. And that's why there's a reason for each of us in this relationship. Anytime I'm performing a wedding, I ask the couple to turn and look out at everyone so they can see, like, oh, we have so many friends here, or oh, we don't have a lot of friends, but they get to see who's there. And I say, hey, will you guys out there raise your hand if you've ever disagreed with your spouse? And then sure enough, everyone's hand goes up, and it's like, okay, this is what we have to look forward to, conflict. But in our marriage, conflict has changed. It grows. You throw babies in the mix, and all of a sudden everything is conflicting because you're both tired and hangry all the time. But I'm learning. Melissa's more like Yadi. She likes to approach the conflict. Let's talk this out. And I'd like to not talk about it. I do what Keith used to do. Let me just pretend this didn't happen. It's not happening. I'll stuff it down. And then, every 6 months or so, I will just full-blown volcano, and you'll have to be on eggshells around me for a while. Which leads us to the 4 horsemen that he talked about. The 4 horsemen from Gottman, I believe, are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. We're all kind of drawn toward one or two of those at any given time. What would you say is your go-to in the 4 horsemen, that your weakness? Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones would be stonewalling for me, just because I tend to, even if I'm so like extra and so loud, I can easily just shut down and just move.
That's scary.
Disconnect. And, but I've been able to realize that a lot of that was because of my personal insecurities, my lack of confidence, like depending on a man to supply all my needs when it's Christ, depending on the wrong thing or the wrong person, or when in reality, it's God that provides that for me. It's God who satisfies me. It's my prayer, my meditation, my time with him alone, and that my husband Hector can provide. But just being more confident, knowing who I am, has helped me be able to confront and be able to face those with loving. I go, okay, honey, I know we disagree here. I get it. We're 2 different people, literally night and day. There's things about him now that I'm more in love, that was the reason why I fell in love, and I want to keep those reasons. I don't want to change them for that. But I had to learn that I had to fix and change my things, right? I can't make that person change. I only have control for me, my attitudes, my whatever comes out of my mouth. It's just, that made sense through therapy. Like, I had to go to therapy to learn that, and realize it. But stonewalling will be the one thing I would do. And I had to fix that with just who I am, knowing who I am in Christ, and being able to talk to my husband and come to a solution that sometimes we will agree to disagree. That's just the way it is. But then you pick your battles and it's like, is this even worth, okay, let's face it. Now we know, let's move on and let's learn from this and grow.
God bless Hope.
Yes, we say that all the time.
Yes. My wife's name is Hope, just in case you didn't know. Which day of the week is dependent on the answer to that question. I would say the two that pop up the most is defensiveness and criticizing. I think defensiveness because we all have this internal battle with sin that we can't always see. And I think I can often fall into the category of self-righteousness, that I'm right, I'm important, I'm valued because of these specific things. So anytime anything may put that in any sort of vulnerability, I become very defensive. So if I think I'm right in a certain area and Hope brings up a very valid point, my first reaction is not to listen to her on that. My first reaction is to defend based off of, these preconceived ideas that I have. And the same thing with criticism. We can often arrive at the same conclusion, but I need her to arrive at that conclusion the way that I did, so I can criticize her based off of not arriving to these ideas that we're both in agreement on, but she got there a little bit different. And so in my own life, I got to look at it and realize I have to strip away my defensiveness of being right, and I have to strip away my critique of how things should be the way they are.
That's good. I think it's great that we can represent all four horsemen here between stonewalling and defensiveness and criticism. And I'm drawn to defensiveness and contempt because criticism is scary to me, and stonewalling, I just can't. I'm a talker, and so sometimes I'm ready to talk and Melissa is not ready to talk, and so then I develop this contempt toward her or towards what she thinks, and well, that's wrong, and I'm forever going to note that that's wrong about what she thinks, and she's going to have to get over that. Or I get really defensive. And when we were in counseling one of the times in our long 9-year marriage, one of the counselors that I spoke to, she said, "Okay, Pastor, what has Jesus taught you about conflict?" And I was just stumped. I thought, well, Jesus hasn't taught me anything, which is why I'm no good at it. But then when you look at the life of Jesus and how he handled conflict, I learned a great deal of assertiveness because I'm an avoider, but Jesus always steps to the problem. He always approaches the problem, which he is the solution. So it's fair for him to lean into the problem. But I'm learning to be assertive instead of defensive. Assertive is, let me approach this, let me step in and not be aggressive and not yell and raise my voice and have to hit the counter so that you'll hear me and understand me, but let me step back and, okay, help me understand why you think this. Help me understand why I'm wrong. And that phrase Keith used it in the message, that phrase can really change the whole temperature of the conversation, of the conflict of, okay, he's not dumb, he just needs help understanding what I'm saying. Because I'm going to get louder and louder and louder because I have no clue what you're saying and you don't understand me. But if either one of us says that, it's like, oh, okay, you aren't the enemy here. We're working together to solve this. So what does it look like for you guys? How do you know when conflict is resolved? What does resolution look like for you?
I want to share a story real quick.
Sure.
I grew up with adults not showing me what true marriage is, what having a conversation, resolving a conflict in marriage is. So my parents had a lot of porn addiction and affairs and uncles and aunts, so unfaithful. It was the reason why I never wanted to get married, right? This is the reason why I will never get married. This is disgusting. And I was a child, I was so young to see all of that, to be part and see, I thought that's the way you avoid and you fall in love with someone else, and that's the way it goes, marriage goes. And I'm only bringing this up because I think there's been a handful of times, but one time that I completely lost it in front of my kids. And I try not to do that, and I fall short and I had to apologize. And it wasn't even bad. My husband didn't deserve that. And I never want to have my kids look at their dad in such a wrong way, right? Like the way I got to see my mom, my dad, and all the other adults. And then it hurt me because even though it was my fault and I just lost it because stonewalling makes you lose it. Like you just disconnect. And if you don't deal with it, you lose it. And now, and I agree with what Pastor Keith said, that whole positive, creating that feeling, it really does matter. Because there's moments that instead of me hiding from that, and and it's just silly. We're all human beings. We're so different. We just sometimes don't get it. And we don't grow at that or whatever. But, there's things that he'll do or I'll do and stuff. But I now intentionally be like, oh my God, you are such a great man. You're wonderfully made, babes. You're so sexy and handsome. But it really just reinforces that, hey, kids, like if I see my kids realizing, oh, mom and dad are arguing or they're disagreeing with something, but I love the way they resolved it. Like, okay, they see us talking about it or just bring it up, but then we say, okay, this didn't work out, but you know what? I still love you. You're still the man I fell in love with. Like, I'm going to find a reason to fight for a marriage. Mm-hmm. Literally, that's what you're doing. When you're resolving an issue or conflict, you're fighting for that marriage. You don't have it easier just because it's been so many years, right? Double-digit years. It's just becomes more attainable to work it out better, right? And so that to me, seeing my kids changing that, we're okay, mom and dad aren't perfect, but I saw how they worked that out. And then my kids, even after a conflict or, I really try not to disagree or anything, but they know because I'm teaching them, baby, this is how you work on finances. This is how you budget. This is, and a lot of times these issues need to be talked to your partners. And so as a family, we're trying to bring that and be more open towards that. But they realize that, okay, it's okay to disagree and it's okay to have conflict. But it's the ending solution, how that matters. That's how I know it's healthy. That's how I know it's good. It's good for my marriage and it's good for my kids as a positive example.
Yeah.
That's really good. I think for our relationship, conflict comes to its resolution when I feel like she understands where I'm coming from and she's owned up to anything that she's done wrong. And at the same time, conflict is resolved when she feels like I understand where she's coming from and I've owned up to where I've messed up. And I think that really comes down to wanting to understand the other person. Mm. The bad side of defensiveness is my own defensiveness says, I don't need to understand what you're going through because I'm right, obviously. But the erosion of that defensiveness is understanding, hey, give me credit. I'm here trying to understand you. I'm not there right now. And hopefully as we're talking, I will eventually get to understanding you, but we're somewhere in the middle. And so that gray area between not knowing where she's coming from to eventually getting to the point where I understand where she's coming from is where conflict happens. And at the very end where I know exactly where you're coming from. I know exactly what you're feeling. And I'm sorry that these 3 things that I've done to contribute to that, I can see where I've messed up, and I'm sorry. And so that final resolution really brings the final period on that disagreement.
Yeah, those are solid foundational principles for healthy marriage, healthy relationship. Is I'm for us. We are fighting for us, and I'm going to own what I can own. And when I begin to do that, I realize, all right, this conflict isn't about me. And that's what we're learning. I think Keith wrapped it up well with what I'm learning is conflict is resolved when I can selflessly say, all right, I can own this. This is my fault. I am responsible for me. I'm not responsible for the spouse I'm getting, but I'm responsible for the spouse that I'm becoming. So let me focus on that. We could probably share a million more stories as we've had conflict over the collective number of years that we've been married. But I think what it all comes down to is making sure that we lead ourselves well in selflessness, just like Jesus did, and honor him in the way that we treat each other, talk to and about each other, and the legacy that we're leaving for our families. Thank you guys for joining us for the discussion. I'm excited to see the engagement in the comments section and continue through this series over the coming weeks. Y'all have a great week.
Thank you.